Natifa will begin the
Hold on, hold
presentation.
on. All right, the
Oh,
recording started, so you can begin.
okay. So Natifa would start the presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So today, me and Shakila Cook would be presenting on integrity and moral purpose. So you may ask, what is integrity? So integrity is the practice of being honest and having strong moral principles. It refers to leaders being honest, trustworthy, and reliable. Leaders with integrity act in accordance with their words. So basically, integrity is the practice of being honest and having strong moral principles. And as Melissa said, we have a quote from Melissa said, integrity is connected with respect, and without it, you cannot gain the respect of your fellow members. And without that respect, organizational goals are not attained. That the integrity of leaders also reflects the integrity of the organization and its members. Because the leaders are the most visible people in the organizations, their actions and values reflect on those who are involved. So, moving along, we're going to relational leadership model. So, relational leadership model is where we emphasize the importance of ethics in the leadership process. This model is focused on developing relational skills at the individual level and across teams. It is grounded in the premise that all team members should grow and develop as leaders working together towards a common vision. Creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment. So, this is where we understand and apply ethical theories and models that operate from organizational values or codes of conduct, as well as being aware of your own moral development and that of others in your organizations, and to help them create and sustain an ethical organizational environment. So, Nash in 1990 proposes four qualities that are necessary for participants to advance ethical standards in the organization. So, the first one being critical thinking skills and convey the ethical components of a problem or dilemma. The second one, a high degree of integrity to stand up for your own personal and professional ethics. The third, the ability to see situations from others' perspectives. And fourth, personal motivation to do the right thing. So, Nash, as mentioned in the previous slide, his idea was having personal courage is of utmost importance when trying to make the right decision for the good of an organization. These four qualities of leadership, when translated into behavior and action, help create an ethical organizational environment. When you identify a problem as having moral and ethical implications and involve others in the decision making process, you provide another example of how ethical environment is established. Several strategies and interventions can be used to create and maintain an ethical climate in a group or organizational settings. The process of doing so should be intentional and include all the elements of the relational leadership model, which are inclusion, empowerment, purposefulness, ethical behaviors, and process orientation. So, bad leadership. So, categories of bad leadership could be, well, uh, so as an Enron case demonstrates, not all leadership is good. Our learning about leadership can come from both positive and negative examples. So, Esther Kellerman divides bad leadership into two categories: bad as in ineffective and bad as in unethical. Her definition of ineffective leadership includes the failure to achieve a desired change, whereas unethical leadership fails to distinguish between right or wrong. Toxic leaders. So, Lepman Bluman describes toxic leaders as those who engage in numerous destructive behaviors and who exhibit certain dysfunctional personal characteristics. To counter toxic, these behaviors and qualities of character must inflict some reasonably serious and enduring harm on their followers and their organizations. So we have a few examples of toxic leaders. So the first one would be leaving their team members or followers worse off than they found them. Second, violating the basic standards of human rights of their own supporters, as well as those other individuals and groups they do not count among their followers. Third, playing to the basis fear and needs of the followers. Fourth, reckless disregard for the course of their actions to others as well as themselves. Consciously feeding their followers illusions that enhance the leader's power and impair the followers' capacity to act independently. So we have a little picture here. So now we're moving on to moral purpose as an act of courage. So, moral purpose. Well, Keda in in 2005 described moral courage as the quality of mind and spirit that enables one to face up to ethical challenges firmly and confidently, without flinching or retreating. Moral courage is the ability to act rightly in the face of discouragement or opposition, possibly and knowingly running the risk of adverse personal consequences. Assumptions about ethical leadership. So sorry. The first one by Lucas and Anilio in 1995 stated that there are eight ethical assumptions about ethical leadership. So the first being ethics is the heart of leadership. So, a discussion about leadership can't be done without ethical components being mentioned. Good leadership is leadership that is effective and ethical. Right? The second one being all leadership is values driven. Values driven leaders lead from a deep sense of purpose and demonstrated commitment to values such as honesty, integrity, courage, and more. Third, ethical leadership can be learned. So ethical leadership can be looked at as a process. In order to reach a point where your values intersect with your leadership style, you may have to go through different experiences or trial and error to reach to that point. Fourth, personal values intersect with organizational values. Personal values can easily intersect into organizational values. Most organizational values are based on integrity and honesty. If your personal values do relate, it can result in an easy or comfortable work environment or experience. Fifth, ethical leadership involves the connection between ethical thought and action. So, connecting a moral reasoning with values and action is important in leadership. Character development is an essential ingredient of ethical leadership. Sixth, character development is an essential ingredient of ethical leadership. So, character is an essential ingredient in ethical leadership. Without character, leaders can lack moral compass that is necessary to make ethical decisions or choose tough situations in the workplace. Seven, we have ethical leadership is a shared process. As an ethical leader, you should encourage your followers to take on leadership roles and mentor them. And last, we have everything we do teaches. This is self-explanatory, but basically we learn by watching others. So in our workplace, should try to be as ethical as possible. So So from here, I would be passing it on to Shakila to do cultural assumptions.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So we begin with cultural assumptions. Firstly, What is culture? Culture can be defined as the term associated with the behaviors and norms found in all social groups or in human societies, as well as the knowledge, beliefs, arts, laws, customs, capabilities, and the habits of the individuals in these groups. As Anastasia said, culture is something that unites people. So, some cultural assumptions and ethics. Ethics exist in a cultural context. They are culturally bound or culture specific. There is no universal agreement on what behaviors or practices are considered appropriate, legal, ethical, or moral across cultures. Henderson, 1992, Toffler, 1986. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, the legal drinking age is 18 years, whereas in the United States it is illegal to drink or consume alcohol until the age of 21. Ethics are also temporal in nature, especially in the light of changing laws and legal norms. What was considered by many to be ethical and legal in the past is now illegal, unethical, and immoral now. For example, racial discrimination between blacks and whites. Having different facilities for each race was considered legal, but in the present now is illegal and unethical. It is said that morally good actions are based on moral laws that are universal because they bring together fundamental values such as truth, goodness, beauty, courage, and justice. These are values found in all cultures, although they may differ in terms of the application. Notions of right and wrong justice and of right and wrong, justice and injustice are violated by the values and cultures of a given culture. To place worth on moral concepts through intercultural comparison is futile. For example, many American women believe that the veil worn by Muslims represents and promotes sexist behavior and practice. What is socially practiced and accepted in one culture may be rejected in another. This shines light on the reality that there is no moral census in international affairs. Ethics and morals differ not only among various countries but among persons in in the same country. Now we have cultural tolerance and cultural relativism. Firstly, cultural tolerance implies that differences in practices are recognized, but not for the purpose of imposing or changing the practices to suit a particular cultural belief. Donaldson, 1989. Okay, so what this means is that you won't. Oh, wait, sorry. Cultural relativism is German to a specific culture, society, or community. The goal in comparing cultural practices is to understand them, not to judge them as good or bad. For example, when running a multi international company, one must abide by the country that they are associated with local laws, mores, and practices, meaning that you won't go to Saudi Arabia and sell and promote short, revealing clothes due to the fact that women across there are not allowed to wear these type of clothes. Ethical theories and moral purposes. Ethical theories provide a glimpse into how judgments are made and the thought process individuals engage into self-ethical dilemmas and other problems. The transformational leadership theory can be described as the foremost theory that incorporates a moral component. So, the transforming leadership model. What this model basically initiates is that it's transforming leadership is a process in which leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. Burns, 1978. This leadership reaches moral dimensions when the leaders and the participants' behavior and ethical aspirations are elevated by mutual influences on one another. Burns. Transforming leaders Transforming leadership involves persuasion, a desire to change something, and multi-directional influence relationships between leaders and participants. Ross, 1991. Values or ideals such as peace, justice, fairness, liberty, equal opportunity, and people's general welfare are expressed by transformational leaders. It is said that it is the relationship and influence between leaders and followers, and Burns describes it as an interaction of power and shared values. The moral purpose of both leaders and participants are key factors in the transforming leadership process, and change results from these shared moral purposes. Leaders, superiors, participants, peers, followers, and others influence these values through specific behaviors. Transformational leaders also are also value driven. They have a core set of values that are consistent with their actions. There are several ways in which a leader can inspire others to higher levels of morality through influence and through modeling behaviors that become standards for others to follow. The moral purpose of both leaders and participants are the key factors in the transforming leadership process. For example, the president of the senior council decided to follow her school's alcohol policy and not permit members to take cases of beer on the spring break trip, despite the fact that the members had unanimously voted to take alcohol on the trip. In this case, the president decided to do what was right despite popular sentiment and knowing that most people would be upset in her decision. What it basically states is that transformational leaders do what is right without worrying about others' satisfaction. There are seven characteristics to relate to ethical and moral dimensions of leadership. Two of these characteristics include courageous and value driven. Transforming leaders have the courage to confront reality even if it's painful, and have healthy egos to withstand peer pressure. Possessing positive self esteem and not needing to please others to win their favor is a necessary element of leading with moral purpose. Modeling a moral purpose. This is where participants admire or identify with another member or leader. They will more likely they will be more likely to imitate that person's behavior. Social learning theory provides a framework for understanding how individuals learn from others. Models in organizations are capable of eliciting ethical or unethical behavior. Vicarious learning or behavioral modeling has an important implication for the leadership process. Members can learn ethical practices by observing those who model these practices in their leadership approaches. They also learn by observing how a peer is treated and that negative consequences result from such behavior. Also, another form occurs when leaders or participants engage in discussions of ethical issues or bring up ethical dilemmas that can be resolved through an exchange of multiple perspectives. We have an example. Um, an example is a student group leader will want everyone to feel empowered, and they will do this by practicing sharing power of authority with individuals, and that so that it will create opportunities for everyone to make meaningful contributions to the group. Another illustration of behavioral modeling occurs when a football coach benches a star player for violating football rules, even though the team needs a player to win the final playoffs. Next, we have moral talk or dialogic leadership. The dialogic leader initiates discussions with peers and members about what is ethical and what the material interests of individuals are. Dialogic leadership or moral talk can be used in student organizations as a way to model ethical approaches and to help create and sustain an ethical environment. Sometimes individuals hesitate to participate in these discussions, and one may be wondering, what is this hesitation called? It is called moral muteness. Moral muteness occurs when individuals hesitate to participate in these discussions or talks. When persons avoid complex problems with moral overtones, protection of the positional leader's own managerial flexibility in solving problems, and the avoidance of dealing with varying ideological, moralistic perspectives of which potentially inhibits the problem-solving process. In simpler terms, this occurs when persons witness unethical behavior and choose not to say anything about it. With dialogic leadership, persons may also avoid discussion of moral ethics and morals due to due to their own illiteracy. The potential harm caused by not modeling this through conversation or discussion is the neglect of moral abuses or an environment that is indifferent to moral considerations. It is both the members and the leaders' responsibility to initiate moral talk and avoid moral muteness. Moral muteness continued. Moral expressions have the have the potential to arouse feelings of connection with moral action. For the modeling effect to occur, the language in moral talk has to be connected with experiences and expectations of people involved in the organization. Moral talk can be used as a type of modeling influence when the dialogue is used to identify problems, consider issues, advocate and criticize policies, and justify and explain decisions. Bird and Waters, 1989. Pocock, 1989. Now we have ethical decision making models. The relational leadership model, as mentioned before, with its emphasis on inclusive and good process oriented inclusive and process oriented leadership to achieve results for the common good, suggests that leaders and members both be included in addressing ethical dilemmas. Leaders and participants together need to be reflective, challenging, caring, purposeful, and consultative when working through ethical issues. The models should be applied with careful analysis rather than with rigid application of any particular model. Reflection and careful consideration of other factors are needed. These models call for the use of your moral imagination, visualizing new alternatives to old or unsolved problems. Otherwise, these frameworks cannot stand on their own. The leadership process is filled with daily ethical dilemmas and problems that do not have readily identifiable solutions. It is not solely the responsibility of the leader to address these dilemmas or confront unethical behavior. Just like leadership ethics, it is not just like leadership, ethics is not in neat and tidy, meaning not all situations can be resolved by professional codes or organizational standards. It requires human judgment and analysis to even determine whether a situation represents ethical issues or something else like a personality conflict between two members. Practical applications. An ethical dilemma is one of those right versus right situations in which two core moral values come into conflict and distinguish such dilemmas from the right versus wrong issues that produce moral temptations. KIDA 2005 provides a framework for examining right versus right choices using a four dilemma paradigm model. 1. Justice versus mercy. Fairness and equity conflict with compassion, empathy, and love. 2. Short term versus long term. Immediate needs to counter to future goals. Needs to run counter to future goals. 3. Individual versus community. Self versus others, or small group versus larger group. 4. Truth versus loyalty. Honesty competes with commitment, responsibility, or promise keeping. Ethical decision making models encourage people to work through dilemmas with moral purpose, with a moral purpose mind, and provide frameworks with which guides decision making and analysis. Instead of reacting quickly, you should carefully consider various steps, including ethical analysis towards making good decisions. Now we have principles for ethical decision making. KIDA 1995 provides three principles for ethical decision making. One being ends based thinking. It is referred to as utilitarianism, best known by the maximum. Do whatever produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Based on the cost benefit analysis, determining who will be hurt and who will be helped. At the heart of this principle, an assessment of consequences, a forecasting of outcomes. 2. Rule based thinking. Kant's categorical imperative: follow only the principle that you want everyone else to follow. Rule based thinking is based firmly on duty, what we ought to do rather than what we think might work. This deontological thinking, meaning based on moral obligation. 3. Care based thinking, putting love for others first. The Golden Rule is an example of care based thinking: to do others what you would have them do to you. Care based thinking puts the feature of reversibility into play. Test your actions by putting yourself in another's shoes and imagining how it would feel if you were the recipient rather than the perpetrator of your actions. These three principles can be applied in examining dilemmas as you begin to work through their complexities and then decide the right course of action. To get an effective approach, one must use each of the three principles before making a decision. Next, we have ethical principles and standards. In the helping professionals, several scholars have adapted Aristotle's ethical principles, which serve as a foundation for living an ethical life and as principles or standards to guide by physicians, psychologists, and counselors in particular. Beauchamp and Childress 1979 and Kitchener 1984. Beauchamp and Childress 1979 proposed five principles of biomedical ethics, which were later adapted by Karen Strong Kitchener, a professor of education for the counseling psychology field. These five ethical principles are: 1. Respecting autonomy. This means providing leaders and members with freedom of choice, allowing them to freely develop their values, and respecting the rights of others to act independently. A major assumption of autonomy is that an individual possesses a certain level of competence to make rational and informed decisions. 2. Doing no harm. This means providing an environment that is free from harm to others, both physical and psychological. 3. Benefiting others. This means promoting the interests of the organization above personal interests and self gain. Promoting what is good for the whole organization or community and promoting it is the growth of the group is the principle of beneficence. 4. Being just. This basically means treating people fairly and equally. And lastly, 5. Being faithful. This means keeping promises, being faithful, and being loyal to the group. Being faithful is premised on relationship and trust. Let's say you are a leader of a group and you violate the principle of fidelity. It would be hard for others to develop a trusting relationship with you. They can be used in a decision making as a decision making tool when confronted with professional dilemmas. An example would be a quick, informal decision making model, commonly referred to as the newspaper test, can influence your actions and decisions. Consider this: before you act or decide, think about whether or not you would be comfortable with your actions or behaviors appearing in the newspaper. These ethical decision making models can help you reach more informed and carefully analyze decisions before you take any action. Too often, we are tempted to quickly put out fires or react to pressing dilemmas without engaging in a process that would provide some assurance that the right decisions was made. These models alone will not necessarily help you resolve every dilemma you encounter. They provide a framework to guide your decision making. They do not provide the moral imagination and creative thinking that are needed to address complex situations. So now we have the chapter summary. Leading with integrity is a complex process that includes the moral development of an individual, the influence of role models, values driven leadership, and the organizational environment. The process of developing into an ethical participant and creating ethical environments does not occur overnight. Groups and organizations are made up of humans who can and do make mistakes, which is part of the learning process. Raising questions around ethical issues is a fundamental component of leading with integrity. People who lead with moral purpose often have as many questions as answers. Leading from the relational leadership model means leading with moral purpose, empowering others to lead by example, including other participants in resolving ethical dilemmas, acting ethically to positively affect the public good, and using a process to approach problems that do not offer clear solutions. Despite the turbulent and fast paced nature of our world, leading with a moral purpose is central to the leadership process. Thank you all for your time, and if you all have any questions, feel free to ask. That will be the end of our presentation.
Are there any questions from the class? Well, if not, I will stop the recording.